Right, so welcome. My name's Graham Hughes and I'm going to be your tutor for this webinar today. And I'm going to talk about mixed methods over the next probably hour or so. But please feel free to ask questions via the chat facility, via the chat window. And when you do ask a question, please send it to everybody, to everyone in the chat. That means I see it on my backup screen. And so I can choose whether to answer it there within the presentation. And it also means if anybody else is wondering the same thing, it saves them asking a duplicate question. I've muted all your microphones. Please leave them muted so that we're not disturbed by the background noise in your office. Let's start thinking about MAXQDA and mixed methods. Just a little bit about me. I'm an older person, you'll discover. I used to be an accountant, and about 15 years ago, I decided to change career, and I went to my local university, the University of Surrey here in the UK, and I did a master's degree in social research methods, and I fully expected to become a statistician. That seemed the obvious course after accountancy to stay with the numbers. But during that course, I was horrified to learn about what were then called the paradigm wars between quantitative and qualitative researchers. And these seemed very strange to me. The way I look at these methods and methodologies is that I have two hands, a left hand and a right hand. And if I think of my left hand as being my quantitative hand and my right hand as being the qualitative one, it seems to me that I can do much more effective work with both hands together than I can ever do if I tie one hand behind my back and insist on only using one, only qualitative or only quantitative. From the very beginning of my approach to research methods, it seemed to me that the mixing was a very sensible thing to do. So it's quite natural to me. After that master's degree, I did 6 years of research at Surrey University, 3 of them fully in the quantitative paradigm, something to do with survey questionnaires, and then 3 years in the qualitative paradigm, a project called the Qualitative Innovations in Cactus, and that's where I met MAXQDA. Since 2012, I've concentrated on teaching people how to use MAXQDA. Now let's we can't get away from a little bit of theory, so let's try and do a quick tour of the theory of mixing methods and so on. And I've got a little color scheme going here, which you'll follow through in a moment. But it seems to me there are 3 broad groups of ways of mixing qualitative and quantitative methods. What I call sequence-oriented strategies, data-based integration, and results-based integration. And let's merge this with a diagram, and I'll go backwards and forwards between these two. So here on my very simple diagram, which is derived from quite commonly used ones in this sort of area, I have an illustration of 2 projects, a qualitative project where some qualitative data is collected, it's analyzed and leads to some results and conclusions. And we also have a quantitative project where data is collected, analyzed, and leads to results and conclusions. But then there are 3 different locations where these can be mixed. My blue arrows at the bottom are what I call results-based integration. Hyperlinking and side-by-side display are the methods we'll come to here, where we do the 2 projects effectively separately, and then compare the results and conclusions of the 2, looking for things like convergence and triangulation. To me, that's not really mixing, but there is one tool in MAXQDA we'll come to which does this. Then the green arrow. This has been done for quite a long time, I suspect. The sequence integrated, the sequence-based, sequence-oriented strategies. And we have 2, exploratory and explanatory. One way of doing this is one does a qualitative project first, does the analysis, and at the end, one of the common conclusions at the end of a qualitative project is more research is needed. But in this case, the decision is that the more research that's needed is to do a quantitative study to see if the conclusion we've come to from our small sample is actually replicated in a much wider population. So having done a qualitative project, we go up the green arrow and then do a quantitative project, which is directed, the questions in the survey or whatever are directed towards establishing whether a particular phenomenon we observed in our qualitative project is actually common. So we go down the qualitative and then down the quantitative. That is sequence-based, and that is an exploratory design. The other way, I haven't got an arrow for this, is to start with the quantitative, and at the end of the quantitative, we observe some correlation, some statistical connection, and we want to know why that might be. What is actually going on in the real world to bring about? Is it a genuine correlation or one of those accidental ones that's just more chance? So at the end of the quantitative one, we then decide to do a qualitative project, which is very much steered towards the particular correlation we've observed and explaining it. That is an explanatory design. I haven't bothered to put an arrow in there. It would make the diagram too complicated. We'll spend most of our time today on the red arrow here, where we actually combine the analysis of both qualitative and quantitative data during the analysis phase. We use both, and this is truly using both hands together. The blue arrows are where we use our hands quite separately, and then at the last moment, bring them together. Wow. The green arrow, we use our left hand and then our right, or our right hand and then our left, but we only really get to mixing methods with both hands together with these red ones. So this is data-based integration, and here are some fairly commonly described examples of this. Qualitative exploration of extreme cases from a quantitative study. For this, in the qualitative data, we need to have the same cases as we have in the quantitative study in order to be able to follow them up, and the ones which are extreme. Qualitative data analyzed by quantitative groups is probably the most common. You'll see shortly when we get into that. Quantizing is where we start with qualitative data and actually turn it into quantitative data. Computers have made that much more possible than it used to be in the past. And finally, rather more rare, where we take quantitative data and analyze it by qualitatively based groups. That's quite an unusual and interesting one. So that's the background. Try and keep that diagram in mind, but much of the time we'll be on this red arrow merging the analysis. So we'll start with results-based integration. Let me open up MAXQDA, and I've got the same presentation here. So I've got the results-based integration. Now, and on my mixed methods toolbar, the tool for this is the side-by-side display. Here it is, the side-by-side display. Now, what I want to emphasize is that the key thing here is the data that we're working with. Now, I've got one of the standard MAXQDA example projects up. The work-life balance English language example is the one that I'm working with here. And this does not have any data that is suitable for demonstrating this side-by-side display. So straight away, I've got to go and open a different project, and I've got a special project which has been created for demonstrating this. In this project, I have two documents. Some research into urban gardening is the topic, and I have a qualitative project and a quantitative. At the moment in my document browser, I've got the quantitative one open. If I use the facility in MAXQDA to open a document in a new tab, I can get both documents here in my document browser, and now I can toggle between them. This is the qualitative one, here is the quantitative one, and so on. Now, for this merging operation, let me just go back and think about this. This is the blue arrows. We've got the results and conclusions from a qualitative project and the results and conclusions from a quantitative project in the form of two documents. And now I want to look at how I can put those two documents together. And there are two ways of doing this. One of these ways is to, let me go into the quantitative and just come down a few pages, get through a lot of early stuff. And one of these is through hyperlinks. Okay, so what I've got here is earlier on I set this up, a comment here about response for better food flavor as a reason for doing urban gardening. And when I hover over it, up pops a segment in the other document, the qualitative document. You can see from the highlight, the urban gardening qualitative results. A discussion about food safety, not quite the same thing as food flavor, but it was as close as I could get. A double click here jumps me from one document to the other. I'm now in the qualitative results document where I can read the full segment and see it in its context. So one way of doing that juxtaposition of the results and conclusions from the qualitative and quantitative is with hyperlinking across the two documents. But more powerful is to do some coding of the documents. So we now have in our code system, we've coded some segments with reasons for practicing urban gardening is the code that's been used here, and it's been applied 13 times. And I've got those now down here in my retrieved segments, and they're a mixture of qualitative and quantitative stuff. If I now come to my mixed methods and look at the side-by-side display, we have a tool which is designed specifically for this task. Side-by-side display of, we can either work with coded segments or summaries. We'll work with the coded segments. It asks me to bring in the qualitative study document and put it there. So I drop that one there, and the quantitative one gets dropped in the other one. And I bring a code in, so I'll bring in the reasons for practicing code. So I've now set up my side-by-side display. We can have many codes if we want, but the key thing is we've got the two documents to display side by side. We click OK, and we get a pop-up table with a coding tree there would be if we got several codes available here. And in one column, we've got the qualitative segments that have been coded to the reasons for practicing, and in the other we've got the quantitative segments, and these can be scrolled independently so that we can juxtapose things from the two. Now, it hasn't been coded very brilliantly because we've just got the headings of the qualitative sections. What would be more interesting would be the text behind them. We could get those if I want to look at food safety by clicking on there. It actually comes up in the document browser behind, and by clever arrangements of my screen, I could help myself to read both and so on. But that is what the side-by-side display item on the mixed methods toolbar is there for results-based integration. And as the title, as my description implies, you can only do it once you've got results, and you need to have them in a documentary format so that you can put these two documents side by side in this way. Let's close that, reset the activations, and go back and open up the other project, which has got more useful data for other things. But that has quickly covered the hyperlinking and side-by-side display. Now, let's now go into the red zone, the true mixing of data, and consider 4 tools in MAXQDA here, which are really, really helpful for mixing your qualitative and quantitative data. And the first thing this takes us into is the word variables. If you are a pure qualitative researcher and are worried by the word variable, please try and think of it as alternatives, categories. It might be another way of thinking of it. Categories, types, features. Another word. In the variables part of the MAXQDA menus, we are able to store the more quantitative aspects of our data. Janice just asked a question about the side-by-side display. No, I think it can only compare 2 documents at a time. The idea being you have a summary of your qualitative and a summary of your quantitative projects. There is not a third type that one would expect to be comparing. If you want to have multiple documents from different research projects, you're almost going into a literature review rather than a mixing of methods, I suspect. Hope that answers your question, Janice. So back to variables. Yes, we put the quantitative aspects of our data in the variables. In the list of document variables, we can see the variables that have been created in this project. Those with a red button are system variables created by the program as the data has been put together. No user input involved in that. These ones with RAS are where there is a literature review example. The blue buttons indicate user-defined variables. So these have had names created by the user setting them up. And we have a big amount of data with interviews with 10 people in this part of this project. And further down we have a survey with I think something like over 50 people in. So we have different variables used with the interview data and the survey data. We define the variables in this part, and with the data editor, which can be accessed from that button or this button, we can put the data against them. We can populate them. I'm going to scroll across. I'll leave that question till later. So I can see the data here. The gaps are where, for the interviews, we don't have values for these variables. But if I scroll down to the survey, then you'll see there is data in that part. So there is variable data for the survey people, which is not present for the interview people. So this is the data that we're going to be working with. And we've got things like their civil status. Are they married? How many children they have? I didn't mean to do that. And from the survey, some things about their work and leisure and so on. So that's where we put the quantitative information. And the first tool I want to think about is called Activate by Document Variables. Let's come to the mixed methods, and it's the first tool on this toolbar. You may well have used this, but I'm going to think about it just possibly a little bit more in more detail. And I just want to clear the list so we can set it up. I thought I'd clear that before we started, but anyway, here is the dialog for setting up Activate by Variable. What we are going to do with this tool, and all sorts of things have suddenly opened up over here. Not quite sure why that happened. I'm going to work with the interview documents, and I want to activate certain interview documents according to their value on one of these variables. That's what Activate by Variable means. We will selectively activate certain documents according to one of the variables. And for this, I want to use the civil status variable. So I select the civil status variable from the full list of variables. This is the same as the list in that variables tool for the list of document variables. I move the civil status into the condition part, and I've got a half formula. Civil status equals, but I haven't got a value for it. I pick up the value over on the right here. A little click on the drop down here gives me all the possible values for the variable I have selected. So we'll start with the in partnership and married. And I notice straight away down here, it's finding 28 documents that match that. Now, I know there are only 10 documents in the interview section here, so it's picking up documents from the survey as well, which I don't want in this particular task. So I can sort that out by using the document group variable as well, bring that in. And I want to change the or to an and, because I've got a double combination here. I want to activate documents which have civil status as married or in partnership and the document group as interviews. And now, out of the 10 documents, it's finding 5. So that it will activate 5 documents, which are the 5 people in the interview group who have said that they are either in a partnership or married. And if I click on the Activate button, we can see those 5 there. They've got the red thing that hopefully you are familiar with. Most of you have used MAXQDA to that extent that you know that that means those have been activated. So now I could activate a code such as domestic work. And now I can see down here, I can read how the married, or those who are at least living with a partner, have talked about how they divide up their domestic work. If I go back to this tool, I could change the value for the civil status, and we can look at some different people. So now if I look at the single people, and it finds 3, I don't need to rebuild the whole thing. MAXQDA remembers the other bits about document group equals interviews. So with those 3, when I click this activate, the 5 married people will be instantly deactivated, and the 3 single people will be activated. That's Riley, Chris, and Amadi. And lo and behold, in the retrieve segments, we have no data because the single people have no reason to talk about domestic work living on their own. They have to do all the work themselves. So you can do this across different groups. And I would imagine that the separated and divorced people also, one person who is separated or divorced, talks about domestic work, and I guess I put him to bed. I guess that this Tatiana has a child, and so on, and she can only do the household chores after putting the child to bed, and so on. So that is activate by document variables. By choosing different values of the variables one by one, we can go through and read the segments. Now, most qualitative researchers would think that was a pretty reasonable thing to do with a key feature or categorization of their cases that may have some bearing on the research topic that they are working on. But if we now use the interactive quote matrix, we can take this to a higher level. Before I start, I'm going to activate the interviews, and I'm going to activate a whole bunch of codes that have been used with this data. And then I start the interactive quote matrix. This is closely related to activate by document variables, as you will see in a moment. In the dialog, I thought I'd cleared these yesterday, but I want to show you how to set it up. So I've just cleared the list so we can do it again. We have a dialog very similar to the activate by documents variables one, but we're going to use it in a different way. To start with, we've got boxes for only activated documents and activated codes down here, which are ticked by default because I activated the data that I want to work with before I started. So the default is correct there. That is what I want. All I have to do is choose the variable that I want to use. Well, use the same civil status, but this time, before I move it into the format bar, I put a little tick in this box, insert all variable values as conditions. And that effect gives me the effect that I get 5 rows of formula. Now, each of these rows of formula is going to result in a separate column in the table that comes up in a moment in the matrix, and so on. So I could do them independently. I could have done civil status across and put in a particular value and then done it again and again and again, but put a tick in there and you get all 5 because I want all 5. When we were doing the single activations, I didn't want all the values. I wanted one at a time. But now for the interactive quote matrix, I want them all. Let's activate, or let's go with the OK. And here is the table. At the moment, I'm on a code which doesn't have any data, but let's just look at the columns. We've got the first column, married, 5 documents. No answer, nothing in that column. We could make that column narrower. Separated divorce, there are 2 documents in that, so we have 2 cases for that. Single, 3 documents in this one. Let's just move that across. Can I? It hasn't found. I thought there were 5 values, but it's 1, 2, 3. Oh, widowed. Yes, we have got widowed over there. So by doing a little bit of maneuvering to get the table how we want it, difficult to get all the ones I want. Well, never mind. I want to move that margin, but it's not letting me. If I do that, let's go with it. If I click on a code which has got more values, the table populates. And here in this column, we get the comments about a typical workday from those who are married, and it's scrollable. And as we come down, we can see the case identifiers, the document names get shown underneath, and so on. And separately, I can scroll for the same code the comments by the people who are separated and divorced. Let's go and look at that domestic work one, because that was the one we saw before. And yes, we do get some data from the separated, but we got nothing in the single column and nothing in the widowed column. And these are the same ones as we were able to see on our separate retrievals before. But now I can juxtapose them much more effectively, and I can move about between different documents and cases very, very easily because I've got a whole choice of codes that were all loaded into this matrix at the startup, because I activated all the codes I wanted to work with as I started. So we've got lots and lots of data that we can work with in a very constructive way, considering how the column, which indicates a feature of the people in that column, whether they are living with somebody else, whether they have lived with somebody else in the past, separated or divorced, or have never lived with somebody else, they are single, how they talk about their work-life balance. And it seems to me that that's quite a reasonable way to look at the data on this work-life balance, a reasonable way to break it down. I think this is a fantastic tool, this interactive quote matrix. So there it is on the mixed methods toolbar, and the setup is quite straightforward. So let's close that. Now, keeping the same setup here, the same activations, I'm now going to look at the crosstab, which is closely related to the interactive quote matrix. We can have it for the same activated documents and codes, and have the same insert all variable values and bring in the civil status. So we make it look exactly the same setup as we had for the interactive quote matrix. The only difference, please can you mute your microphone, the person who just arrived? Thank you. Click the OK, and the table that we get has the same structure of cells. We have a column for in partnership, no answer, separated, single, and widowed, and so on. But what the table is displaying are the counts, the frequency counts. So this is a numeric table telling us how often these codes have been used in these columns, which is a different way of looking at the data. In the interactive quote matrix, we were reading the data, reading the language, and thinking in more qualitative terms how those people talked about their domestic work across. And we can see there are 6 segments coded as domestic work in the in partnership or married, 1 in the separated, and no others, and so on. That was the pattern we observed when I did them separately there and also in the interactive quote matrix. With the crosstab, we can work with this data in more quantitative ways. So we move slightly to the right-hand side of that diagram. Remember, this mixing in the interactive quote matrix, we're on this red arrow going backwards and forwards across here with the texts. With the crosstabs, we're going backwards and forwards more towards the quantitative side with the numbers. So we've got a table of numbers, and of course we've got various tools that we can show them not necessarily just as numbers, but as percentages, percentages of the whole table in this one, or this one, row percentages going across, and we can add color shading to highlight the highest value percentages, or we can work with column percentages with the color shading to help us as well. Now, this isn't everybody's cup of tea. Nobody uses all of these tools, but for some people, this is just fantastic because they can get to see patterns. Those who are able to use their left hand and right hand together find that having started with pure qualitative data and coded it in a qualitative way, they can then move over and use the pattern of code frequencies and these percentages or the outright numbers. They can use them in these constructive ways. Not quite sure. Yes. I'd accidentally ticked the count hits only once per document. I didn't notice myself do that. The numbers for a moment didn't make sense. I've got back to the actual count of the number of coded segments and so on. This one allows me to count documents which have got the data, as opposed to, so if someone's mentioned domestic work 3 times, it only counts as 1 in that one document. So that's what that button is doing. Now, a beautiful feature of MAXQDA that I'd just like to really stress at this point is that over here on the Crosstabs toolbar, we have a button which will take us directly to the interactive quote matrix. So having started with the numbers, we could, with one click on this, open up the interactive quote matrix, and we are back to the actual texts. And I can have both of those open, so I can have the numbers up here, thinking about the numbers, and at any stage, by moving into the interactive quote matrix, I can go and read that. What are 8 typical work days? Let's have a look. Click on the typical work day down here, and here are the 8 segments. I'm scrolling through all of them of a typical work day from those in partnership, and so on. I think that flexibility is just amazing. So, we started with activate by document variables. We multiplied them up to columns for the interactive quote matrix, and we've quantitized them for the crosstabs and so on. And we can use those all through. And of course, this being MAXQDA, from the interactive quote matrix, if we were to click on one of these links here, it would open up that particular segment in the document browser so that we go back and see it in context as well. I don't think I need to demonstrate that. So let's close those down and come back. So that is a little scheme. We started with activate by document variables, added the quote matrix, and turned that into quantities with the crosstab. The non-interactive, just the quote matrix, which is this one in between. The setup dialog, I think you'll find, is just like the interactive quote matrix. So we can work this exactly the same way as the other. But what it does, if I click the OK on this one, is it takes us straight to an export dialog. So the quote matrix doesn't display on screen. It is designed for exporting a table. You have the chance to choose different formats, Excel, HTML, DocX, and so on. Be careful, because you could have a large number of columns, and if you try and do a Word document with too many columns, you'll find yourself getting very tangled in a very messy table. So it might be better if you've got lots of columns to go to Excel. But this might be something that you want to include in a report. But you've got to be careful also about the number of codes that you've got active and so on as you do it. I'm not going to go through with this. I'm going to cancel, because I don't think we need to do that. You might find it just as easy to open up an interactive quote matrix, get it set how you want, and then do the export from that, because both the crosstab and interactive quote matrix have their own export functions. But there might be some circumstances where you just want to go straight to an export with the quote matrix from there. So that is the first set done, developing use of variables. Now, 2 other tools which I've shown in green here at the right-hand end of the mixed methods toolbar: qualitative themes by quantitative groups, coded segments, and the same summaries. These tools, according to the MAXQDA reference manual, the help dialog, the help function comes with it. These have been designed for the sequential use in particular. So qualitative themes by quantitative groups, probably it means that we've done the quantitative first, to identify the quantitative groups, and we're on the invisible green arrow that's coming back the other way, and we're doing the qualitative data second. That's really, so this is an explanatory design that we would use this for. Let us just reset my activations, think clearly. I'll activate the interviews, and I'll just activate some of the codes, and we'll start the qualitative themes by quantitative groups, coded segments. Now this has a different dialogue, a different kind of setup. In the top here, it asks us to choose a variable. Click on the little drop down, and we've got our range of variables. Let's stick with the variable we're familiar with, the civil status, because we know how that works. And now I have to choose the columns one at a time. There isn't a insert all of them. So I know we've got data for in partnership married. It should be only for activated documents, and then it's counting 5. Now I know that we have none for no answer, so we'll now have the separated divorce, and it finds 2. And I think we know we have some data for single, 3, but the others will probably be 0. Yes. So those numbers, 5, 2, 3, we've seen before. They sum up to 10, which is the number of documents in the interview group. So we've got everybody in these 3 columns. Now I can choose codes from my code system. So let's drag in the flexible hours. We'll bring in the domestic work. It's not working with the activations down here, so I can bring in codes whether they're activated or not. Those 2 will do just to demonstrate this. Click on the OK, and we find we've got a little bug here at the moment, so I hope this will get sorted out. Even though we ticked the only activated documents and it counted 5, 3, and 2, it's still now, at this stage, it's downloading the survey documents as well, which is why we've got 28. But the first ones will be those from the interviews, and then we get to the survey data as we scroll further down, which is slightly unfortunate. But this table now looks just the same as the interactive quote matrix. I've got fewer codes because I brought fewer codes in. I've got slightly more control of my columns because I created the columns, I chose them individually as I started. But to all intents and purposes, I'm looking at an interactive quote matrix that I've created by another route. So that's all that this one is, coded segments. But we also have the possibility of doing this with summaries. And for this, I just need to check. I haven't got summaries for all of the data. I think I'm going to work with the satisfaction codes down here for this. So let's now open up qualitative themes by quantitative groups summaries. And I've got to go through the same thing again. I've got to choose the variable and I've got to choose the columns, but we're getting quite used to this now. Let's have the only for activated documents. At least see the right numbers appearing there. And that. Let's bring in some of these satisfaction codes. I should have used these for the one before. Those 4 will do, and click OK. And as we go through here, what I'm seeing on the screen are the analysis summaries for the data instead of the full data. So to make that clear, I'm going to minimize that and do the same setup for the other ones. So actually I want to get rid of flexible hours and domestic work, and I want to bring in these satisfaction ones. This is the full text segment version. Qualitative themes by quantitative groups, coded segments, and click OK for that. So this gives me an interactive quote matrix with full size segments, and restore this one and put it down underneath. And this is working with summaries. So if I get the same code in place, I've got a summary here for this one. So scroll down. Riley, yes. Riley has several segments here. At least 2 segments. So all that data for Riley, which is displayed there, has been summarized down to this here in the analysis summaries function. So that's what this other tool, qualitative themes by quant groups summaries, just over the back there. If you've gone through your coding and you created coded segment summaries, you can work with those in this interactive matrix format. You've done a data reduction, and then you're doing the comparison across the quantitative groups, their civil status, are they married, divorced, or single, and so on. So that's, let's just look at another one. And yes, we've got a couple of summaries here. So Matteo, there is Matteo's full segment, and that has been reduced to wishes to have paid vacation. And for Riley, Riley is obviously quite talkative. Riley, we've got a long segment there, and that has been reduced to this by one of the analyzers. To answer Christine's question, have the summaries been coded by the researcher? It's the other way round, Christine. To get to summaries, you code the full texts, then you choose to go into the analysis tool for summaries and do a data reduction at that stage by creating your own summaries of all the coded segments that go for each document under each theme. If you're not clear on that, don't worry now. It's not necessarily relevant to everybody, but I just wanted to point out why that tool exists. So that is the two tools here: qualitative themes by quant groups, coded segments or summaries. They can work with the same data, but you use the summaries one if you have already gone through the analysis summary grid stage to create data reduction summaries, so that they're then ready for you to use in the mixed methods stage at a later stage of analysis. So that's what those are, and they can be interpreted in the explanatory sequential design, which is why I've colored them green here. Let's move on to more red ones. So back in the red mixing table, mixing the data during the analysis, that's what we're thinking about here. And I'm calling these more extreme mixtures of methods. Okay, this won't satisfy everybody. Some of you may feel quite uncomfortable at some of the ideas here, but that should be okay, because research is a very broad business, and different people have very different requirements. But these are, I do admit, moving rather more towards the quantitative end, which is why in that sense they're a bit more extreme. So the first one I'm going to look at is converting code frequencies to a document variable. And we have two ways of doing this. Let me just check my notes again. Yes, I'm going to come, staying with the interviews. I have some codes here for dissatisfaction with their times. And I'm going to look at this code here, dissatisfied with time, let's just make it slightly bigger, for friends and family. That's the code that I want to look at there, dissatisfied with time for friends and family. You may not be aware, but it's always been there, or been there for a very long time in MAXQDA. If I was to do a right click to get the context menu for a single code, I'm doing it now. Here is the context menu for this code, but it'd be common to all codes. Near the bottom in small print is a little option, transform into document variable. I hope you can see that. It's quite small print. That function will create a new document variable in our variables, and it will populate it with the frequency with which this code has been used in each of the documents. One click on this is all it takes to do it. It has opened up the document editor, and it's created a new variable, and it's put it right at the right-hand end of the document editor here, called dissatisfied with time for friends and family. Scroll to the left, and because I've got the interviews activated and I've that button set as well, all my interview documents are at the top of the list, and the numbers here are the straight code frequency counts. So dissatisfied with time for friends and family has been coded twice in Matteo's document, twice in Riley's document, 5 times in Selim's document. Just scroll back just to confirm that. Yes, that is Selim. So Selim seems to be very dissatisfied with his time for friends and family, and so on. I can now work with these code frequencies in all the ways that I could use variables such as the civil status. That's the variable we've been using in the other tools, quote matrices and so on. Now I can create quote matrices where the columns are ordered in some way by the extent to which the they've expressed dissatisfaction with their time for friends and family according to this frequency table, if that makes sense in your analysis. That's a big proviso. It must make a kind of sense for that to work. But having done that, let me just give a go at that. Let's use the qualitative themes by quantitative groups. To clear the variable, I just use please choose a document variable, and that clears all of those. So now I can come down to the bottom and find where's my dissatisfaction variable. There we are, dissatisfied with time for friends and family. Choose a value. Well, we'll start from the highest. One person has that. 4 people have 2. One person has 1. And 1 none. And then what shall we code shall we work at? Let's clear these because they're not going to be satisfied. So let's look at what they've said about domestic work and about volunteering, and whether they can work from home, for example. Only for activated documents. How does this work? And here we are. So the most dissatisfied has said nothing about home office, volunteering. Oh, there, he has talked about domestic work. That will be Selim. So Selim has talked about his domestic work. These people are pretty dissatisfied. They've got 2 coded segments each for that, dissatisfied about time for friends and family. And here's how they talk about their domestic work and so on. So this is a qualitative by qualitative table. We coded our data according to how much they talked about being dissatisfied with time for friends and family. And we've coded our data for how they've talked about their domestic work. And I'm putting those 2 things together in this table. The columns are organized according to the number of times they've said they're dissatisfied with time for friends and family, 5, 2, 1, and none. And the data, I can pick up any one of these codes that I chose to bring into the analysis at the start just by choosing them from here. I think that's quite powerful, and I think that's not too extreme, actually. What is a bit more extreme is the quantizing button here on the Mixed Methods toolbar, and that works in the following way. If I were to activate the whole dissatisfaction group, now the quantizing button becomes highlighted, usable. Click on it, and we just get an "Are you sure?" dialog. There's no setup for this. What it says is all activated codes will be transformed into document variables. And it reminds us the codes will remain in the document system. Yes, that dissatisfied with time for friends is still there. It's not changed by the conversion. When we converted that to a document variable, it added a new variable but left the code untouched. This one, this button, simply does a whole bunch all in one go. Let's click OK. It's done it. Nothing appears different on the screen. Oh, sorry, it does it. Again, it pops up with the document variables. Again, we've got the interview documents at the top. And if we scroll across with black columns, we get all these dissatisfaction ones. These are these codes in order. So the first one will be dissatisfied. Oh, that's the one we did before. Sorry, this will be dissatisfied with flexibility. That's the header code of the group, all with 0. Here is with flexibility. There we are. That's the first one. So it'll be down in order down here, and there's only 3 in total. So there are the 3, 2 there and 1 there. The numbers are quite small. We haven't really got enough data, but I hope you get the idea. And I don't think it will have done the friends and family a second time because we had already converted that. So there's the dissatisfied with time for friends and family. And you can see it's numbers 2252. Those aren't anywhere else. So it hasn't redone that. Knowing that it was already there, it didn't waste its time and space doing it another time. But that's all that quantizing button does. It has just enabled us to use all of these codes in the way I did, or with the interactive quote matrix, as I just demonstrated a few minutes ago. So that's another way you might get into your analysis using those frequencies to group people together. And that's all that quantizing is. converting one code at a time using the context menu. Remember, just right click on a code and choose the transform into document variable. Highlight or activate a whole bunch of codes and use the quantizing tool to do a whole lot all in one go. And that is two of the extreme mixing of methods, converting code frequencies into quantities so that we can then use the other mixed methods tools to look for interactions between the codes. And we're not looking for intersections. We are treating those as simply the code being present in the document means that we attach that variable value to the whole document. Now, statistics by qual groups and typology table are very different. So keep your hats on, because this is now going to get rather tougher, because now we are looking at mixing methods the other way around. Statistics come from the quantitative side, and we are going to look at those statistics through the lens of qualitative. Statistics by quantitative groups. Statistics by qualitative groups. And there is the tool there. And that relates to the typology table. So these are two more functions that we have not yet covered in this webinar. And I just need to, I'll start with the typology table first, and then come to the statistics by qualitative groups second, I think. And for this, I'm not going to use the interview data. I'm going to use the survey data. So we'll activate the survey, and we'll come down. My code system. We'll want that one later on. To the survey questions down here, potentially. And let's open up the typology table and think about this. Now, a typology table, as will become clear in a moment, is a table like the crosstabs, but both the columns and the rows are formed by variables and their data. That's the key thing to get your head around here. Columns are variables and rows are variables. When we're looking at the crosstabs, columns were organized by variables, but the rows were organized by codes. In the typology table, both columns and rows are variables. And for this, I'm going to use the variable highest level of education. Got such a long list, it's difficult to find the one I want. Slow down and get. Oh, I'm in the row variables. Okay, that's where I'm going wrong. I'm choosing the rows before the columns. I'm thinking about the columns, and I should be using should be using the rows. Sorry, I want the satisfaction motivation ones down here. These are the ones I want, and they are already ticked. Let's just deselect all fields and then select them the ones I want. Satisfaction, motivation. These are the ones I want to look at. These are variables from the survey which have scales and so on. So they go values from 1 to 5, I think. So I choose the rows first. That's what confused me. And then I've got to choose the columns. And now we're back in what I was expecting. Let's just clear the list. So we should now be familiar with this. Highest level of education is the variable I want. And I want the insert all variable values. Select that and move that across. And there we go. Now, that'll do me. I've got all my ones there. Only for activated documents. Let's go. Now we get a table. The columns are formed by all those highest level of education values. The problem that I've got here is it's got a wide table. We've got a whole lot of columns, and I can't see which highest level of education it is. I've got to hover over it. That's the bachelor degree, that's the master degree, that's no formal schooling. That makes it difficult to interpret this table, where in the table we've got mean and standard deviations of all these scaled values, scaled variables, that they answered pure quantitative questions. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to run it again, typology table, and I've continued that one because that's the rows. This one, I now need to do a little bit of sorting, and even after I've created it with the insert all values, I can move things around. So if I put the PhD at the top and the master degree, let's do it in kind of descending order. Secondary school will be the next one after bachelor degree, trade school after secondary school, primary school, and then no. So we've now got it in kind of descending order of educational level of education, from the highest PhD down to no formal schooling, in a kind of status hierarchy that I think most people would be able to accept. Let's run it again. The table looks the same, but now we know we've got the PhDs here, then the masters, then the bachelor degree, then the secondary school, then the trade school, and then the primary. And now let's look at the motivation at work row. This was scaled from 1 to 5. And for the PhD people, their motivation at work, the mean of their scale is 4.3. For the master's degree, it's 4.0. For the bachelor degree, 3.7. We're getting a pretty even scale here, aren't we? The secondary school people at 2.8 have got less motivation at work than the PhD people, the same as the trade school, and very similar to the primary school, but those with no schooling have the least motivation at work, the 2.0. So the fact that those numbers now come down in a reasonably predictable way, only a slight hiccup that the primary school people slightly more motivation at work than the two went through to secondary school, but our sample is quite small. There's only one only one document in this column, so that's a pretty dodgy statistic, actually, that 3. There are 12 documents in each of these, so those are more reasonable. This one might be a little bit of an outlier, but we can sensibly interpret this table to some extent, combining 2 different variables in this typology table. Now remember, because we can convert codes to variables, we could have something that started as a code value in our qualitative analysis, and we end up bringing it in as a variable counting means and standard deviations of the distribution of its values up here in some circumstances. So that's quite exciting as well. That is the typology table. The statistics by qualitative groups keeps the same idea for the rows, but for the columns, we define the columns according to the values on a code. So I'm going to go back to my interview documents because we can understand those a little bit better. And I'm going to come back to, in the interviews, we have a scaled question about how well they self-assess their well-being. And one person gave a low score of 2, 3 gave 3, 5 gave 4, and 1 gave 5. And these are the values I'm going to use for this statistics by qualitative groups. So for this, drag a code that has subcodes. I'm going to drag in the well-being code. And then I'm going to select the highest one first, then come down the scale for my selected values. And I've got my 10 documents selected that way. And now I choose the document variables that I want to work with here by clicking that, and I get this document variable one here. And now I'm in a little bit of difficulty. I can use the number of children because that is a numeric variable. And there's an age variable. I'm struggling for data here, but if you were wanting to use it, hopefully you would have better data. I don't need to define any values, that will do. And I get it. Now I've got those, number of children and age, only for activated documents. Oh, I haven't got any activated documents. Will it let me activate them? Yes. Wonderful how flexible MAXQDA is. Even after you've opened up the dialog, you can change those activations. So, okay. And here is my little table. So the columns have come from this coded data. These are self-assessed, but they could have been evaluations created by the analyst. So we've got the highest well-being, coming down well-being to the lowest well-being. And then we look at the mean age of the 5, 42, 28, 31, 46. There is no discernible pattern. The data has no real meaning. There is only one person in this very high document. We haven't got enough documents. We haven't got enough data for this tool really to be functioning. But it's the only data I can find where I can reasonably demonstrate within this same example project. But we can work in this way with quantitative data, things like age and number of children, grouped according to values that we have established from our qualitative coding. That's what statistics by qualitative groups means. And that's why I say it's quite an extreme mixing of methods. If you want to bear with me, I'll just very quickly mention the similarity analysis for documents, and then we've covered every tool on the mixed methods toolbar. This similarity analysis for documents is pretty advanced, and I like to think of the MAXQDA program as a toolbox with lots of different tools that you can use for all sorts of different activities of analysis and so on. And if things like lexical search, summarizing, coding queries and so on, these are the tools like hammers and screwdrivers and pliers and so on. Tools like similarity analysis for documents are like adding a chainsaw to your toolbox. If you think you can make a mess of a piece of wood with a hammer or a screwdriver, imagine what you can do to it by misusing a chainsaw. This is a tool that with misuse, you could come up with completely bogus results. So don't think that you can just press a few buttons and come up bingo with the answer to your research question by pressing a couple of buttons here. This similarity analysis, you've got to be very, very careful how you use this tool. But let me just show you the basics of it. And I'm going to work with the interviews data. Let's open up the similarity analysis. And here are some ones I already created earlier. Let's create a new one so you see how you do it. So a new similarity distance matrix. We'll be working with activated documents. So I've got the interview data. So I want to choose some codes. And if I had previously activated, I could have brought those in. So let's close and just choose some codes by activation. And I'm just going to use the codes that have got highest frequencies here. Flexible hours, home office, amount of hours, unpaid labor, free time. That'll do. So I've got 9 codes I've selected. Have I really? Because unpaid labor had subcodes. Deactivate that. Domestic work and childcare. Those are the ones I want. So I've got 7 codes in play here. Hope those were the ones I was intending to use. We'll go with that. So similarity analysis, new similarity table, insert activated codes, and I bring those in there. That's why I went through that activation process to get those in. So in the top half, we choose the codes by which we are going to compare the documents that were activated before we started. And I've got 2 fundamental choices here for this comparison. Either similarity simply on the existence of the code, or by using the code frequencies and a distance measure. We'll start with the basic existence of the code, and we have the simple matching choice, and we've got some alternative ones, but we'll just go for simple matching there. And I'm not going to bring variables into it at all, so I've got 7 codes and no variables. I'm just looking for similarity of the 10 documents across these group of codes. Click OK. And here is a new similarity matrix that I've just added at the bottom here. And with the normal coloring and so on, the highlight shading, which we can turn on or off with this button here. Does it not turn it on? Why am I not? Oh, that should have been giving me back my color. I don't know what, it's taken the color off. Oh, I turn it on with that. Okay, these buttons turn the color on for the whole matrix, shaded by column or shaded by row. We'll go with shaded by the column one, and that one turns it off. So it's a slightly different way that it works in other places. Now, for this similarity matrix, you'll notice that all the values are between 0 and 1, and down this diagonal where we're looking similarity with itself, they're all 1. So 1 represents perfect similarity across the documents. And I've got a 1 here between Amadi and Riley, and same one there between Riley and Amadi. So they are correlating perfectly on this measure. They are so similar, they have a score of 1, they are effectively identical, is what this table is telling me. So in some way, Amadi and Riley across these variables, these codes are so similar, they are in fact identical. Let me now create another similarity, but with the same setup. This time we'll do a distance measure, squared Euclidean distance. This will bring into the calculation the code frequencies. And we click OK. And here is a new matrix. And again, we'll have the same shading. And we look at Amadi and Riley. Now, here, the values are not between 0 and 1. The perfect score is 0 now. This works the other way. The lower the number, the closer the distance, the closer the two documents are, the more similar they are. Higher numbers mean they are less similar. And if we look at Amadi and Riley, who are identical on the similarity matrix, we get a score of 12.15 for Amadi against Riley. But Amadi is much more closer to Chris at 2.2 and David at 4.58 and even Anna at 9.97. So Riley is not even a close match on this scale. So on the similarity matrix, Amadi and Riley were identical, but on the distance matrix, they're not even best friends. That's an illustration of how the choices you make as you set up this similarity one have a huge bearing on the table that you produce and hence the conclusions that you draw. That's why I say it's like a chainsaw. You can produce all kinds of nonsenses. You can add variables to it as well. So we could bring in quantitative variables. So not only are we thinking, are they also referring to the same things about domestic work and childcare, but are they also similar in terms of whether they're married or single and their age and that kind of thing? We can bring those things as well into the similarity. What you need to know is that when you are running these, for the similarity matrix, you're between 0 and 1, and then the closer you get to 1, the more similar the table is telling you it is. And on the distance matrix, the values can be anything. The smaller the value, the more close they are, hence the more kind of similar. But you can get completely different values across different things. Amadi and Riley were ones we were looking at there. If I just go to the visual tools and open up a max map, and I'm going to do a new 2-case model, and I'm going to have Riley and Amadi as my 2 cases. and let's use that model. What's going on here is in the similarity matrix, it's working with this list. If Amadi and Riley, from the activated codes that we're using, all of these codes they have in common, it says they are the same. But if they've got different frequencies, it moves them apart on the distance one. And if we haven't looked at the codes on the outer fringes here, which are, these codes are attached to Amadi but not to Riley, and these codes have been used with Riley but not with Amadi. If we were to select any of these outer codes in our similarity analysis, they would reduce the similarity score. So it's just by chance, the codes that I picked a little bit at random down here because they had the highest numbers work closely with these. So I think all of these, typical work day, satisfied with work life, flexible hours, amount of hours, they all in my selections that I was using here. So the similarity analysis here is doing that two-case model pairwise across all of the documents. So each document is being compared with 9 other documents in that similarity analysis table. That's why we get quite a big table. Most quantitative tools work better if you've got larger samples, but this similarity analysis, it doesn't matter how big or small your sample is, the calculation is valid. What matters is your methodology by which you choose which codes you select and which variables you select for the analysis. That is the crucial step, which governs whether you produce a nonsense or something really, really valuable for your research. Let me just go through quick summary. So we've done results-based with hyperlinking and the side-by-side display. We then looked at some basic using variables, activate by document variables, one value at a time, interactive quote matrix, used potentially all the values for a variable in a nice interactive table, a fantastic tool. Crosstabs did the same, but used frequencies, numbers instead of the texts. Using the two together, you could jump from crosstab back to quotes to get to the words behind one, and the quote matrix was an export file. The qual themes by quant groups was very much like the interactive quote matrix, but a different way of setting it up. And that led us into using summaries in place of coded segments via the qual themes by quant groups summaries, if you've previously done the summarizing step. More extreme methods, we can convert code frequencies to document variables, one at a time from the context menu, a whole bunch by activating several codes and then using the quantizing tool. That turns our codes into variables. And we could then do statistics and typology table, where the typology table is variable against variable in a frequency table, and it calculates statistics like means and standard deviations and so on. And the statistics by qual groups, we take our variable and we group it according to something that is still a variable. We could, by converting that particular code into a variable, run the typology table, but by leaving it just in the code, we can do the statistics by qual groups. And finally, the similarity analysis for documents, the dangerous tool where you can easily create nonsenses. Lots more help in these additional resources. If you haven't found it before, look on the MAXQDA website for this book, published by Springer, Analyzing Qualitative Data with MAXQDA by Cookhartz and Rediker. Udo Cookhartz is the original brains behind MAXQDA. He is the person who 30 or more years ago started to try to create a software program to help with analyzing qualitative data. Stefan Rediker joined him sometime later and is a true mixed methods person. They're both mixed methods fans. And in their book, Analyzing Qualitative Data with MAXQDA, they devoted a whole chapter to mixed methods, chapter 13. Published by Springer in 2019, really, really good book if you're using MAXQDA for a PhD. Look on the website, maxqda-press.com, where lots of material is published, all free resources on this website. It's all got data, all got articles and literature and things related to MaxQDA, but there is no charge for this. Springer may charge you for that book. There's wonderful resources and textbooks free on that, maxqda-press.com. I'm hovering around here, giving you time to write that down. Join the MaxQDA Research Network. Talk to other MaxQDA users. You'll find lots of useful contacts there. And look for more videos in the video tutorials and so on. Quickly, lots of resources on the MaxQDA website, so don't be shy. Go and have a look around, get lots more help that way. Another push for the research network. Almost everybody who uses MaxQDA is a nice person somehow. I've met some wonderful people at MaxQDA conferences. Do go, join them, join the research network. You might find somebody else in your country speaking your language. Could be a really useful contact. They may have a totally different field of interest, but because they share your language, they can help you with little language difficulties. Or all over the world, from anywhere in the world, you may find other people researching a very similar topic to you, and they may also be a valuable source of information and references and so on. So join the research network. You don't have to be a professor. You don't have to be a PhD. As soon as you've got a MaxQDA license, I think you're entitled to join the research network. Here's another push for maxqda-press.com that I mentioned in my earlier references. There's a MaxQDA blog, and if you're good enough to write an article for the blog in English and send it to research.network@maxqda.de, they might publish it, and some people, lucky people, might even get sponsored with a free MaxQDA license. So if you've done some interesting work with MaxQDA, share it on the blog. And I finally got to the end. There was one question I haven't answered. So Christine asked, do you have to have MaxQDA Analytics Pro to perform this side-by-side analysis? No, all of the mixed methods functions are in the basic MaxQDA program, Christine. Analytics Pro is for going on and doing the statistics in detail. You could upload SPSS outputs in PDF code and perform the side-by-side. Yes, the assumption of the side-by-side analysis that I showed you before, let me just pull that one, go open that project again. We were working with the quantitative results document. I jump back up to the top and scroll down. We are working with actually here the published report, the published article about a quantitative project on urban gardening. So we've gone so far to the end of the analysis that we're actually working with the final document, which, yes, is in PDF format. That is, but you could be working on a draft of that report or even a preliminary summary of the results. But for the side-by-side analysis, you do need to have a document, preferably a single document, which has your key results and conclusions from each of your quantitative, and a separate document, your qualitative projects. And that's what you perform the side-by-side analysis with. That's what that was about. You don't have to have Analytics Pro. You could do your quantitative project in MaxQDA Analytics Pro or in SPSS or Starter or any quantitative program and so on. Here, for this example, we've used two things that we don't even know what software was used behind them. We're just working with published articles to look for convergence and triangulation there, or to illustrate this side-by-side display. But all of these tools are in all versions of MaxQDA. You don't have to have Analytics Pro to do this. Hopefully that's answered Christine's question. Anybody else got any questions? I'm very open to questions here, but I've possibly bamboozled you completely. If you've had enough, here's the door to get out of the webinar. Top left-hand corner of your GoToMeeting screen, just click on the little pull-down menu, and there's the exit, leave the meeting. Thank you very much for being with me today. I've enjoyed myself. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves.